Hey there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are reaching us from. Welcome to another session of this masterclass. As you were seeing on the video, this is presented by Birdie.ai. If you're interested in centralizing your user feedback, exploring and making better informed decisions for your product strategy, make sure you visit us at Birdie.ai, reach whenever you want. Today is going to be a short introduction for those of you who doesn't know me. I'm Pence, one of the co-founders here at Birdie. I'm with the product team as well. And today we have with us Michelle Merrill. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and start in a moment, Michelle. But before that, just to let you guys know, there will be people from the Birdie team handling and managing the chat. So feel free to post your questions at every moment you want. And at the end of this session, we're going to make sure we have a Q&A session, and Michelle will address all of your questions and doubts. Okay, so without further ado, Michelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pants. I appreciate it. Give me just a moment, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get my screen started and go through a brief introduction here about what we're going to, myself and what we're going to talk about today. Just a moment. Let me do this, put it in center view. Okay, Pants, how does that look?
Sounds perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, today's class is on scaling feedback loops across the product development lifecycle. I'm going to be your speaker today, as well as hopefully a host for a lively Q&A at the end. So I encourage you to ask questions along the way. Keep them in mind. The Birdie team will be tracking that so we can hopefully get to everyone's questions. I'll try to pace myself so that we have ample time to talk about feedback loops. First of all, just want to introduce myself. Good morning, afternoon, evening. Welcome from wherever you are in the world. You might be joining us. I myself, it's morning. I'm in the Pacific Northwest part of the United States. I want to thank our host, the Birdie team, for hosting us today and bringing us all together to talk about this. I'm pretty passionate about this topic. It's not the only thing I do at GitHub. However, it's something that is a little bit near and dear to my heart. I've worked in so many different industries across sectors and various positions, and I've seen this done really well and have been part of teams that are just starting out and scaling their solutions. So I want to talk a little bit about what I do at GitHub in product operations. For those of you that are product ops practitioners or are familiar with that domain, you understand that it can be varied across businesses. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about the model at GitHub and kind of the place in which my lens is right now. My team, the team that I direct, we work across the delivery and feedback cycles. So that's everything, including our internal and public roadmaps, release management, changelog management, and then our feedback ecosystems and tooling. And so when I speak about it, I speak about it firsthand. Some of the things I'll be talking about today are, more principle based. They are based on my experiences as a professional, but they don't necessarily represent, just exactly how we're doing it at GitHub today. I do have some things that I'll share with you there, but, they come from a wide swath of experiences that I've had over time. And I sort of wanted to treat this truly like a class and kind of talk about some building blocks you can have in your feedback ecosystem and programs. So I'm going to be looking at this from the product operations practitioner perspective. And the reason why I say that is when we think of product ops, we usually build for engineering, product management, or design, or what we call EPD. And we look at those individuals, those professionals as our users. At GitHub, the PM is our user, product managers. So what we build in the product operations team is largely things that our PMs can use in their day-to-day work as they develop product on behalf of our users. So with that being said, I can't reduce the friction of PMs and build something for PMs that makes their lives easier, but causes pain to our external users. So it's really important that I don't build in a silo, even though the PM is my first user. I definitely don't want to cause pain for our end user and their experience with feedback as they interact with GitHub. And then the other thing that's I'm going to kind of come at this with a little bit of a lens here is helping our users to participate. Like their incentive to participate in feedback programs is closing the loop. It's hearing back from the company in which they're sharing their opinions with. And so those are kind of, my framework here where my mind is at in forming this talk. Also, again, coming back to where we are today, I want to focus on the key principles that I have found to be true when you're building feedback ecosystems. And then kind of those foundational tenets for scaling. So let's go ahead and get started. Hans, how am I doing? You guys can still see my screen okay? All right, I'm
Yeah,
going to take
it's
that
looking
as
good,
a yes.
looking good.
Thank you
Yeah,
so much. Okay,
go for it.
Yeah, just want to make sure we're advancing. Thank you. Okay, so today I want to talk a little bit about the product development lifecycle, just to sort of underscore, where we are, what we're building for, and the phases of the lifecycle, where feedback interplays. This is a very generic, guide that I put together just so we can all sort of be on the same page. When Michelle says, the PDLC, what is she really talking about? One thing I'm not going to be talking about today is the SDLC. So I look at the software development lifecycle as part of the product development lifecycle in specific phases, but really around the implementation phase is where we see software development lifecycle. I'm not really going to be talking about feedback as a part of the software development lifecycle. I'm going to look at it as extending the full course of the product development lifecycle. So now that I've sort of level set to you where we are at, what we're going to be talking about, let's get into some details here. So the essential elements of excellence in a product feedback solutions, as one component of a whole solution framework, really for me rounds these like 4 gates, if you will. And again, this is not a talk that's meant to be comprehensive of everything you need to know about feedback, but it's all about scaling. And so for that, it's really about collecting, aggregate, qualify, and using the feedback. PMs, and again, as I'm building for PMs, they've identified the strict interdependency between these 4 as key components of any healthy feedback ecosystem. When one component is not synchronized or designed to interact within the ecosystem, the program will falter. So if your intake or your collection funnels aren't working, if your qualifying is not working, if how you're using it's not working, then the system doesn't work. It collapses essentially, and it's broken. As this happens, as you have these broken pieces, or one piece of the system is not adequately performing, it creates pain points for our PMs. And it compels them to compensate by adding resources to the feedback process. So resources and time. And I want to talk about that a little bit more in depth. So when you think about how do I maximize PM participation within the feedback cycle, what is it that they need to better participate? Because it's not just getting the users to give us their feedback, but it's also like behaviorally, what is your company, what is your system for them to participate? And for us, I'm talking largely about product feedback because we're talking about the product development lifecycle. We're talking about feature requests, might be another name you would know by bugs, issues. And so PM participation is key because when that wanes, you usually don't wind up closing the loop as well with your customer, and really the use part of this cycle doesn't function as well. And there's this debate between virtuous and a vicious cycle. Both systems have feedback loops in which each iteration of the cycle reinforces the previous one. So it's positive feedback feeding into the circle. These cycles will continue in the direction of their momentum until an external factor intervenes and breaks the cycle. And so they do pick up momentum. You get really good at this, and you can pick up velocity and really streamline how you're scaling your feedback as long as the cycle works. And I want to talk to you a little bit, expand on the definition of what we mean here when we talk about this like terming of feedback cycles as either virtuous or vicious. that comes up across a lot of conversations. You could go out and Google it and find out, various authors and things that have written about this. But for me, it's the direction in which the cycle keeps going. It's this perpetual motion that keeps it running. And what's interesting is when I've talked with PMs and you talk about, you talk with them about like what their needs are and, to, again, behave well within a feedback system. They want to know that the system provides the value they need, and PM values vary. From a lot of the PMs I've worked with over the years, and this is where I'd love to hear the audience's participation, especially later on, what incentivizes a PM to participate in the feedback cycle? We can all say we love our users and we want to hear from our users, but what piece of information, what is it that they're looking for? For most of the PMs that I talk to or have worked with over the years, it's that they want to understand that the direction in which they're taking the product, it's a validation point. So directionally, they want to understand that they're going in the right direction, they're building in the right places, in the right spaces, that it's meaningful. That other thing I mentioned was validation, not just directional validation, but validation that they're working on the most impactful thing. And it can't just be, as much as we love our users, it can't just be impactful to our users. We sort of, as in product management, we have to look around the corner, see where the market is going, see what is needed, what is the best, opportunity for, market impact for our product. And so that doesn't always align with what our users want. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit because I don't necessarily view feedback as a one-for-one. Me as a user, I may go to a company and say, hey, I really desire XYZ to be built. It's causing this pain point. It's work blocking for me. I may present that to them and they may tell me, look, it's not on our roadmap, we're not going to do it. But it's not necessarily a one-for-one. It's not like every single piece of feedback that comes through in a scaled environment is going to have that direct answer or that direct solution. So the aggregation piece of this is very, very important. And we'll talk later on about a little bit about the qualification and then more about how we might weight this. Is weighting a thing that we should do across feedback systems? So the PMs, kind of at the heart of, again, building for them as our user, they expect an organization that provides a process that reduces layering and maximizes their ability to interact with the feedback. A PM at scale can't interact with every single piece of feedback. So there's a lot of opportunities ahead that we'll talk about and how you can really scale, especially when you're talking about high volume situations. So give me one sec. Keep on going. Okay. So there's some key components and considerations that I'd like for you to think about when we're talking about scaling. I put together 4 here. This list could probably be so much bigger, but I was trying to keep it really succinct and probably to the highest priority items in my mind. So your entry point or your intake. Some key considerations there is traffic sources, your intake mechanisms, which PDL phase you're in. Are you in an alpha? Are you testing it just with a few customers? Are you doing proof of concept? Or are you going full GA? Are you releasing it into the wild for everyone? What does that entry point look like? Should it be varied? Because customers like to be in not, multiple spaces. They might want to be in a mobile app and be able to give you feedback. They might want to be able to do so, in some kind of CSAT way. There's lots of places that customers can give feedback. And so that entry point is pretty important. It's a key component of scaling, like to get that right and to understand how that's going to work in an overall ecosystem and how you are going to handle the volume. The collaboration on the tools is a really big one I want to talk about. With the growth of remote-based teams, it's elevated the need to implement solutions that are collaborative and allow for asynchronous work. This one really speaks to my heart for anybody that's familiar with GitHub. Way before COVID, we have always been a remote-first company, and the platform GitHub itself and in what we work on is built for asynchronous work. And this is how I work with my teams. This is how I work across the company, across time zones. And so it's really important that your collaboration in the tooling that you pick for scaling allows that asynchronous opportunity. The usability is huge too, because you want to be able to, I put usability integration, I probably could have put them together, but you want to be able to integrate them into existing workflows where PMs are working. This is a really, really important factor that I sometimes think gets overlooked. You have PMs working in a space, they're working in particular workflows, and then you're saying, hey, jump out of that and go over here to this tool, work in that for a while, bring the insights back over to where you're doing your development work. And it's really cool when you can find tooling and build tooling that works within the environment where the PM's already working, where they're doing their day-to-day work. Because again, you are trying to help contribute to their behavior with the feedback space. And then integration, let it fit into the solutions that you have already. And then I think most PMs are looking for quick integration, something that is minimal impact to them, minimal uptick for them to learn and understand, but something that's very easy and has good usability. So this last one, or these last two are kind of fun. So the review, I was like, review and decide. It's kind of the same thing. So this review process, it's super important that you understand who reviews feedback and who decides, right? Is there a definitive way that you're explaining to your customers if something's on the feedback, if something is going to be on the roadmap or not, if you're going to implement something or not. And the weighting and role of feedback in which it plays in product decision making. I think that needs to be better understood in most PM orgs. How much weight are you giving feedback? How much weight are you giving if it's an incident versus a bug versus what I would call an obstacle? An obstacle is something that has a workaround, or a blocker, something that doesn't have a workaround. Does customer importance matter? Does problem impact matter? Problem severity? And by customer importance, I mean like maybe their length of time with you as a customer, maybe they're coming up for a renewal or some kind of contractual thing that increases an ARR moment. Maybe they're a large customer for you, a small customer. How does this all factor in, and should it? And these are all, again, things to think about with scaling. All right, I'm going to keep going because I have a few more slides I want to get through before I open it up to questions. And then closing the loop. Who is the customer participation driver? Who closes that loop within is that the PM themselves? Is it something that's published externally on a roadmap? Or is it, somebody is part of your customer service or customer solutions org? Is it your account executives? And then who responds? Having an understanding at scale whose responsibility this will be. And then is there a response model? Is there an SLO around this? Like we receive feedback and we respond to it within 30 days. 2 weeks, whatever it is that something you're willing to adopt? All right, I'm going to keep going here. And when we talk about the primary goals of these 4 components, I kind of wrote them out here to make it a little bit easier to say, like, what am I driving for when I'm looking at reforming my intake or entry points? Really is to lessen customer confusion. It's all about them finding access to you easily and readily. And then also to increase the feedback signals back to PMs, because when you have a really consolidated entry point, they can find you. Tools, you want to ease the volume, requirements needed to scale, and reducing the noise from the signal. This is really important, as well as bringing forward insights, those analytics of what you're hearing. And then review, you're optimizing for discovery and insights again. Tighter PM customer cycles during the discovery phases, especially of the PDLC, is really important to standardize. Give them a place to plug and play and interact with customers early on. Help them to have that so they can get those review cycles in, they can iterate, and we can ship to learn. Cascading the ship signal is really important. You have to create an incentive for the user participation and increase that engagement. And that usually comes through closing the loop. What's in it for them? Why would I give feedback to a company that I never hear back from, or I don't know what's going on? It really is demotivating for our users if that's the case. And so closing the loop is a really important piece of this too. And a primary goal for that would be letting them know when the thing that they've asked for is happening. Okay, a quick recap. We'll go through this. The product feedback cycle components is that you need to have an agreement on the cycle components on each stage of the PDLC to ensure it's right-sized for the phase. When you're in alpha, beta, maybe a pilot, it does not need to be this giant organism that you've created, but definitely when you have a matured product that you're continuing to iterate on, yes, you want something really very well oiled. You want something that is easily to automate and build on top of, build analytics on top of. Mapping feedback is really important to map it against your customer entry points and map that to your data. And PMs in the early release phases tend to focus on easy to collect data first and build out feedback synthesis methodology over time as they're scaling. So don't worry so much about the methodology in the beginning as you're scaling as you will at the end, and you're sort of completing your ecosystem. And last but not least, I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of having choosing what to implement. The goal is should not be about how many ideas you put into the product, which can result in a feature factory, but rather how much the ideas the ideas your customers give you insight and produce customer outcomes. Knowing what features and ideas to implement and when is key to the long-term growth of the program. So choosing what to implement and when is going to be pretty important to produce high impact work and a high impact product. So much more to say on this. I feel like I want to give adequate time for questions here at the end. So I'll go ahead and jump to the end of questions. And thank you for having me today.
Hey, Beck, that was amazing. Thank you for the masterclass. I think our guests also enjoyed. I hope everyone will be able to leave here today with something new they learn, with some questions to start bothering and thinking and reconsidering the way they treat and they work with feedback. A couple of questions that emerged. Let's see if you can address. Back when you were on the how to scaling, you mentioned about volumes, you mentioned about high volume feedback. And from Roman, he asked, what would you consider high volume feedback? And on top of that, is there such a thing as too few feedback to be considered valid? So regarding volume.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm going to take the last part of that question first, the too few feedback. There's, that really goes a lot deeper into sort of product management methodology, like when is enough feedback? How do you know you have enough feedback to move on? And I really think, again, it's going to come to what's going to play a big role here is what phase of the product development lifecycle are you in? What phase are you releasing in? And at GitHub, sometimes we're testing things out very early on with 1 to 2 customers, and it really depends on what we're building, what the build is, and who that customer is, what we know they're using it for. If we feel like that customer is a pretty good example of what our other customers would want in this particular space. And again, what we build at GitHub is vast and wide, so it's going to have some flavor there. So that's something to take into consideration for sure. But I wouldn't hem yourself into like a number there and say it has to have five big customers, 1 big customer. You know your market, you know your product. Get the right customer in to test it out for you, and know that it can extend beyond that customer and its use case. I think you're golden. I also think when you talk about high volume, that's relative. High volume, what I would consider is when you get to the point that you can't read the feedback and glean insights. It's too much resourcing, too much time to do that, that you need automation and tooling or some kind of insight driver. That's when you've kind of reached that sort of pivotal point that you have to have a build on top of your feedback ecosystem. So where you're gathering, where your intake, it might be multiple sources, and then something has to be an overlay to get those insights for you. When it becomes not humanly possible or it's too much resources than your team is willing to spend, like you don't want to have one person FTE doing this all day, kind of thing, then you need to start looking at automation and actions that you can build on top of it. So
yep, makes a lot of sense. So forget a number, focus on knowing what you're testing, and the people that are providing feedback, they will be valuable if you know what to expect. Then you mentioned something like PMs mostly use feedback to validate hypotheses. Makes sense. I have an idea, this hypothesis, our daily work as PMs, and we use the voice of customer to validate that, to drive, to steer our decisions. What other use case you can think of?
Yeah, there's quite a few. And I will say like the largest percentage is that validation.
Mm-hmm.
But there are times when customer brings to a customer might bring feedback to us of something we haven't thought of before.
Mm-hmm.
We simply it's a new idea to us. It's a new way that we understand the way the customer is using the product. We're like, oh, we think these are the use cases for our product ABC. And the customer's like, well, I'm actually using it for D. Yeah. And we're like, oh, we never even thought about that. Like, that's pretty creative. And tell us more. And that's usually where the conversation goes from there. But it's usually around how is this, give us more information around how this might be used in a way that it's unaware to us, or in a way that it might be work blocking for you that we didn't know, right? It might not be work blocking for us, but you're using it obviously in a way that might be work blocking for you. And we'd like to know what's stopping your work and what we need to build a solution for that.
Mm-hmm.
So those would be some other couple examples.
Yeah, we have another from Dan. He asks, in your experience, what are the pros and cons of building a system that solicits feedback directly from the customer versus asking the CS organization to capture customer feedback and pass it through? Oh,
I love this question.
Yeah, proxy versus direct.
I didn't touch on this at all, and it was just so hard to cram things in. But we have, I look at feedback as direct feedback and indirect feedback. Direct feedback is I'm hearing directly from the customer. They're telling me what's going on. They're telling me their pains, things that they're grappling with. Indirect is I'm working through somebody who's on staff. Maybe they're an account executive, maybe they're in customer solutions, and then they're funneling that feedback back to product. What I have found to be true more often than not is that when it comes from somebody on staff, it is better qualified feedback. Why? Because they're talking to the customer's giving some information, they're asking questions. This staff obviously knows the product, so they're asking the right questions that by the time I and product get that feedback, it's better qualified. I can do more with it if I understand it better. Sometimes when a customer comes firsthand, I love hearing the customer voice, but it takes a while to drive through to what the customer needs. And the only reason I say it's better, I wouldn't say it's like better, it's just better qualified coming from staff, because they're handling it firsthand and can give you the insights into what the customer's thinking, usually quicker. But they both have their place in a feedback ecosystem. You need to talk directly to your customers as well. So build a system that has both.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Let's go to the last one, because we're on the top of the hour. We got one from Martin, and he asked, how would you optimize internal feedback loops and handle the engagement adoption, such as sales, CS, insights for product teams?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, right? So this is this indirect. You're like, you have these teams that are out talking to customers. You want that knowledge coming back to to your product team or your EPD team. That is a tricky one because the way in which they meet with customers is varied. They may handle a customer service ticket and get feedback there. They may be sitting in a quarterly review with the customer in their offices getting feedback. So it's varied. What you want to do is focus on the intake mechanism. Give them all a place where that feedback can go. So even if it's sitting in an ancillary system, like I'll use Zendesk, for example, it's widely used. If it's sitting out there in a Zendesk ticket, or if it's happening in a quarterly review, how does it come back to product? It needs to come through some central point where the information coming back matches. So use templates, use other ways that you're sort of saying, hey, wherever you're talking to the customer, these are the 5 pieces of information I need to know as a product owner. And so that's what we've actually tried to build at GitHub, because that's our life. We're talking externally, we're talking internally, we're talking all to everyone. And so we've tried to make that easier for our product managers by giving them central place. And then we do the work, product operations does the work to slice and dice that and put it in a digestible way for our product managers.
This is amazing. So as product teams, let's guide our colleagues in other departments to drive them for the information we need to get as response. That's amazing.
One other thing, oh, sorry, I was going to say one other thing I'll add is don't be afraid to tell your sales folks what you need. This is the information I need from your customer, because it may not be the information they're gathering. Saying I need, these 1 through 5 things. When you talk to a customer, bring that back to me. Don't be afraid to outline that for them in whatever mechanism you're using. Bring that forward to them, so it's more meaningful to you. That's the best favor you can do yourself, is help it be more meaningful.
I bet the sales team will also thank you for that.
Probably, yeah, I think so.
Okay, so with that, I think we should close the day with an amazing experience. Michelle, I cannot thank you enough for the session today. I hope you enjoy. I know I have, and I hope our audience also. Any last message you would like to share with these folks?
Just thank you for having me. I have so much more to talk about, obviously, in this space. I was worried I couldn't come up with enough for a half an hour, but please, for those of you, find me out on LinkedIn, send me a message. I'd love to keep chatting. It's a favorite topic of mine, but it's been wonderful to be here today. I appreciate it.
That's amazing. Thank you. And thank you all. Michelle can finish answer the questions on the LinkedIn link. Maybe we have a couple more questions there. For now, I thank you all for the time. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.